It's about to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Hi, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and let's write some code together, shall we? What we have on the menu today is to continue working on Kill the Newsletter, this web application that I have developed and maintain that helps you translate from email newsletters into RSS or Atom feeds. And today we are going to look into logging and the database setup and all of that in this new version that we are writing. That is sort of a rewrite, sort of an adaptation with things that I learned along the way since the last time I touched the Kill the Newsletter codebase when it comes to web development and that kind of thing. And before we get into all of that, I want to share with you a hack. It's a hack, but here's the problem. The reason why we are returning to Kill the Newsletter, besides the need to bring Kill the Newsletter up to date with the latest versions of packages, security fixes, and even new ways that I learned to develop web applications. Besides all that, the reason that we are doing this specifically right now, I was planning on doing this a bit later. I wanted to focus on the JS effects, audio processing stuff. But the reason why we are doing this right now is that the application is broken. There is this library that deals with renewing TLS certificates so that we can serve Kill the Newsletter using HTTPS. And that kind of security is sort of a standard, and it is necessary for every application these days. So we are using this library to manage the certificates, And this library has not been updated in Kill the Newsletter. There are new versions of the library, but I have not updated the library in Kill the Newsletter. And in fact, in this rewrite that we are in the middle of, we will not be using that library anymore. We will be using a dedicated reverse proxy that will do TLS termination and that will deal with the TLS certificates for us. We will be using Caddy. But this library has not been updated in the existing version of Kill the Newsletter, the one that you can go and download right now and run for yourself. Because Kill the Newsletter is an application that you can use in a server that I manage and that I pay for, or you can download and install on your own server if that's what you want. So anyway, the application cannot renew TLS certificates because apparently that library was using an old version of the protocol to talk to the certificate authority, and I didn't update the library in Kill the Newsletter, so it tries to speak an old protocol that the certificate authorities have phased out. And that means that we can no longer get a new TLS certificate, which means that the application will stop working somewhere around December, because we had an old certificate that was valid until December. That was all fine and good. I thought I had plenty of time to fix this. And then someone reported that the application was not working. It wasn't running. On my server, on the canonical server for Kill the Newsletter, it wasn't running. And then I thought, well, this has happened before. I will just reboot. Reboot always works. So I just reboot. That didn't work. As it turns out, the issue was, after reading the logs, I learned that that library that needs to be updated not only cannot get new certificates, but it's also trying to get a new certificate in advance, which makes sense. It is a sensible thing to do. You would like to renew the certificate way before it expires. So the existing certificate would expire in December. The library was trying to update the certificate in mid-November. Excellent. What is not so excellent is that when the library is not able to renew the certificate, instead of just saying, oops, couldn't renew the certificate, that's too bad, it crashes the whole application. I guess I would argue that it's a bit too extreme. It should just warn you, but that's what it does. It crashes the application. Maybe that's a good thing, because if I didn't know already, then I would have learned that the library was unable to renew the TLS certificates by then because it was crashing the application. Anyhow, the application was not running on my server, and that's terrible, right? So here's what I did to fix this. And I'm going to share this with you because it's kind of a fun little hacky solution. And also in the interests of other people who are running Kill the Newsletter on their own servers, perhaps you would want to refer to this to patch the problem in your installation while we are in the middle of doing this rewrite that will come with a permanent solution. So I will share with you the hack I did to fix the issue. But before I do, let me say hello to Mage, who is here on the chat. Great to have you. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you enjoy this. And I know that you are into Node.js and TypeScript, so we'll get to that in a moment. So here is the terminal for the actual server. This is the machine that runs killthenewsletter.com. If you go there, you are reaching this machine. And I am here because I will use the history of commands to show you what I did, which is ridiculous. The problem is that library that issues the TLS certificate needs to be updated. That's the issue, right? And I could have gone to the old version of Kill the Newsletter, update the library, and release a new binary. I thought about doing that, but for one reason or another, it didn't work. I think I had the wrong version of Node.js. I was using Node 18, while Kill the Newsletter is running on Node 16, I want to say, something like that. Anyway, it didn't work. And I was in a hurry. I wanted the thing to be back online as soon as possible. So I came up with this solution. It sort of worked, and I left it there because hopefully by the time we need the next TLS certificate, by the time of the next renewal, which will happen, I guess, mid-December or something, by then we will have the new version of Kill the Newsletter deployed, and this one will be in the history. Anyway, so here's how this works. We need to update a library. Well, all we have is the binary. We have the Kill the Newsletter binary containing a library, and we need to update the library in there. It just so happens that the Kill the Newsletter binary was generated using Cache, which is this project I created that is essentially a self-executing compressed file, a self-executing zip file, a self-executing tarball, more specifically. It is a binary that was generated by Cache, and what this binary is just something that has a payload, like a tarball. It decompresses the tarball somewhere in a temporary file system, and then it runs Node from there. So, first of all, I needed to determine where this temporary folder was. And that was easy enough. If the application is running, you can just search for it. And then you will find this temporary directory with this name that is kind of weird, and that's on purpose because it has to be a unique name. And then you know in which temporary directory the Node modules folder has been extracted. This is where you will find all the dependencies for Kill the Newsletter. In particular, you will find the add small tech folder. And in there, you will find the dependency, which is called auto encrypt. and these are just JavaScript files. So it really is a self-extracting, self-executing compressed files, self-extracting executable. I forget the name. I think it's a self-extracting executable. That's what it is. And this is the extracted version of that. And this name will change. I was going to say that this name will change every time you run the application, but that is true of the newer versions of Cacha. In the old versions of Cacha, I think that this name is baked. I think that this name will be the same on your machine as well. This is an old version of Cacha that packages in a slightly different way. So at least this path will be the same every time. And I may be in front of the path. Let me do this. Now you can definitely see that. Anyhow, here is where Cacha extracted this dependency for Kill the Newsletter. So here's what I did. I went to the registry, the npm registry, where we get all our dependencies from. And I downloaded the right version of this dependency. I downloaded the updated version of this dependency and swapped it in place. That's what I did, and it worked. So here's how this goes. You have to wget, and this is why I wanted to be on this machine so I could show you the right URL. So you download this tarball, which actually is, when you npm install something, it actually goes to this URL, downloads the tarball, and decompresses the tarball in the Node modules folder. That's how npm install works. So you just go and do what npm install would have done for you. You download this tarball, and it has to be this version, which is the updated version that knows how to speak the newer protocol that the certificate authority knows how to deal with. So you download this tarball, and then you extract the tarball using the good old incantation of tar extract verbose zip file. And then this file name. And then you move the folder into this location, replacing what was there before. So you're sort of patching the package into the executable. You're patching the plane while it's flying. After having done that, you need to restart the application. But if your application is like mine, it's already crashing and the process manager is already restarting or trying to restart it anyway. So you can just tell your process manager to restart Kill the Newsletter if necessary. And if the application is crashing, this will be done for you already. And it will pick up the new version. And that's why you need to restart, because you need JavaScript to load the new file. And that's how you can patch the existing installation of Kill the Newsletter to work around this old package. Terrible, I know, but it worked, so I left it there. And you can do it too on your installation if you need. Hopefully you will not need this. Hopefully we'll get this new version out before your certificate expires, if you're lucky. Fun stuff, huh? And of course, this is a temporary folder. So if you ever need to restart the application, that's fine. Cacha will use the same folder and will pick up the version you patched. But if you need to reboot the machine, this temporary folder will be cleaned in most operating systems. And then this folder will not exist, so you will have to patch it again. You will have to run Kill the Newsletter for it to create this folder. Then you have to get in there and patch this dependency again. And that's how you patch up a plane while it's flying, or a plane while it's flying. Hey, Bo. It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me. Anyway, this whole hack was just a tangent. Let's get into the main business, which is to talk about logging, database management, and everything else. Let's take a look at how we were doing this in the old version of Kill the Newsletter, which is commented out right here. So in terms of logging, I don't think we were doing logging. Oh, we are doing some logging. We were doing some logging by saying that this is the name of the application, the version it started, and then the configuration was loaded, and that was that. We didn't log a whole lot. Since developing Kill the Newsletter, I developed other things, and those things were more complicated and they needed better logging. So I developed a whole concept around logging, and I thought I would just bring it into Kill the Newsletter, though for logging and for many other things, it is kind of overkill. You don't really need such a elaborate structure for such a simple project. But I already thought about all the issues that go around the thing, so I might as well just use it. And also, I am planning on extracting some of these decisions into other libraries. Like I have I have all these libraries encapsulating solutions for problems that I encountered. I thought about having a library to deal with the Express stuff, as in Express.js. So to deal with logging and other related problems. I will not get into the details right now. So in order to create a library, I think that first I need to have at least 2 different applications using the same solution so they can identify what is the same, what's different, how the API needs to work, how the interface in general needs to be. And that's why I am I'm going to be copy and pasting some things from CourseLore. That's what I'm going to be doing. But I will be explaining and reasoning about these things as I do. Anyhow, first there is logging. The application was not logging much. Now we are going to add some logging to the requests. We'll be able to see the requests as they come in and as they are served, and we'll be able to see how long that took and how big the output was. Again, kind of overkill for an application that is essentially 1 page. But hey, there you have it. So that's it for logging. We are going to get into that in a moment. But let's also talk about database management real quick. I was using, at this point, this library that I developed called Liafac SQLite. That is a wrapper around Better SQLite 3. I was using this library, and this library has changed a lot. For one thing, this auxiliary library that was dealing with migrations has been incorporated into this one. So the way that you use this is somewhat different now. But other than that, I think that the database structure is super simple. That's all there is to the schema. Awesome. And I think that the way that this library was keeping track of the current schema is compatible with the current version. So we will be able to just continue using the database migration in pretty much the same manner. Nice. And there's actually a fun story about the migration that you see here. You can see that there are actually 2 migrations. And naturally, as with any database migration, I thought that if I uncommented the thing, it was going to look better. It looks worse. So as with any database migration thing, it tells you the history of the changes. So you had this schema, and then later you realized that you needed to change the schema in this way. And then you have a list of things that have happened to the schema over time. And you can see that there are 2 migrations. The second is just creating an index, which is kind of a fun story because I was testing the application locally when I was developing this way back. Everything was working. I ran all the tests. Great. I put it to production. And then it wouldn't even start. It would try to start and fall on its face. Everything was atrociously slow. It was a database index that was missing. because of the lack of this database index, the application was trying to do a full table search. And of course, in development and in testing, a full table search is fast. But in production, we have around, I want to say 10 gigabytes, 20 gigabytes, something like that. We have a big database, that's what I'm saying. And in a big database, if you don't have an index and you have to do a full table scan, that's going to take a while. You can see that I was trying things, right? The patch that I explained in the beginning of the stream was not the only thing I tried. I have a couple executables that are broken and everything. Oh, the database in production has grown since I last checked. It's now 26 gigabytes in one file that is the database, the SQLite database for the whole application. But it's just one schema, or sorry, 2 tables. And a database index, that's essential. Anyhow, let's start with logging. This is how I know I went to the index file to open this file. I could have just gone to the file. Anyway, this is how I'm dealing with logging in CourseLore, and that's how we're going to deal with logging in Kill the Newsletter, in the hopes that in the future I will be able to extract the common parts and have a library for this. I expect it to be something like liafac express as it goes. So first thing I'm doing is I'm creating this auxiliary function that will log the date and the type of process that we are in. And this is something I can just pretty much copy and paste into the application here. And I want this to be in this particular place after having set up the configuration, but before we set any routes, any handlers for requests. And you'll see why in a moment. But both in CourseLore as well as in Kill the Newsletter, I am following this pattern of having an application object that has a process object that holds the type, number, and ID of that process. And yeah, I think that that's all there is to it. After having defined this auxiliary function, I immediately use it in 2 different places. The first is to just log that the application has started. See, this is what I mean by the things that change and the things that stay the same. These are the sorts of things that you have to understand to create a library. In fact, I think that I have application name. I do. So there you go. Something that I can use in CourseLore. Maybe I can even simplify this. Like so. You may note the way that I am logging things is I'm making a list and taking the message parts and joining everything with tabs. I really like the way that this looks in the console because everything is almost everything is lined up. Some fields are a little longer, as you will see later in the log, so it doesn't exactly line up. But it's also machine readable. You can just split by a new line to see all the log entries separately, and split by tab to find each field. So as long as you know the position of the field, it's sort of a structured format, but it's nothing like JSON that would be kind of hard to look at. I haven't used, Mage says, I haven't used VI for 20 years, and today, inexplicably, I started playing with NeoVim. Now I feel like a dizzy. Yeah, I looked into NeoVim recently as well, because I used Vim for, I want to say like 5-6 years, but that was almost 10 years ago. That was 10 years ago, actually. Oh boy. I couldn't really see the draw in NeoVim or Vim or Emacs these days. I have used Vim and Emacs. I have used Vim for almost 6 years, then Emacs for almost 5 or 6 years. And then I'm using Visual Studio Code. I'm much happier. It looks better. I mean, this kind of scrolling is so smooth. I didn't have to set up most of this. It looks okay out of the box. I really like it. I think it's a better use of my time. Anyhow, so I just changed this implementation. I might as well copy it again. There you go. And the application name has been set here as well. It has. Fun. So anyway, as the application is starting, it is going to log, and yeah. And I realized something else. The process number doesn't have to be here because it's already there. So I can just do this. So if it is the main process, remember that the main process is the supervisor. It is the process that has just one responsibility, which is to spawn the children processes that are the web server, the email server, the reverse proxy, and keep restarting them in case they crash. So if you are the main process, start and log that you have started and show the address of the application, just as a convenience. Cool. And by doing this and using the application name, we have extracted the commonalities. And this is ready to go into a library. Great. Oh, and also when exiting, I log that the application has stopped. And because I am using application log, not console log, these logs will include the date, the type of processes, the process number, the process ID, and everything. Awesome. Next, we have this bit, which is a bit more complicated and perhaps a bit more interesting to talk about. I am now fixing the types real quick. This should be easy. We'll see. But this type is still lying to us because I am missing some parts from the index that I changed since the last stream. Hang on. Now I am in, it may be hard for you to keep track of where I am, so pay attention to this part. I am now in course lore because I want to check something. Application server locals, response locals, banana, something that does not exist. Okay, that complains. But here it's not complaining about the lack of that. If I try to do application web locals banana, it does not complain about the fact that this field does not exist. And I suppose that it has to do with this. Or rather, we need to look at its type. Now, there you go. That's what I'm talking about. And here we don't have a corresponding declared type, so I will just put this here. And now if I try to do the thing with banana, it should complain. Awesome. And then I can be explicit, or rather I need to be explicit about the locals that I will allow. For example, this. Why are you complaining about this type? Okay. Sometimes if you're trying to cast things in a particular way that TypeScript cannot pick up the intersection between the types, it will say like you're trying to convert into something that doesn't really make sense, but we as the programmers, we know that it makes sense, so we can just force that by saying this, which is a complicated little TypeScript quirk. But the thing is, I want to make sure that my type is exhaustive. So if I try to refer to something that does not exist, it complains. So for instance, if I change this into a name that does not exist, it complains, but if the name does exist, then it does not complain. And this name does exist right here. Yeah, so the way you reason about this is that this express type will have a locals that can be anything. But I don't want the locals to be just anything. I want to have more control over the locals. So I can omit the locals from the express type, and the express type is actually callable, so I end with a function type and then end with the exact response locals that I want to have available. Hang on, that's the response locals. That doesn't seem right. That should not be part of the application. Forget everything about this. This is the wrong thing to reason about. We should just have a type response locals logging, because we are not talking about application web locals. We are talking about the response locals. I will show you what I mean by that in a moment. Now that's more like it. Awesome. I will explain all of that, but first let's see what you have to say. Yes, my brain is now too slow to need beast mode editing. Yeah, that's one point. I think that thinking is the bottleneck when I am programming. It's not the speed in which I can edit code. Though I will admit that there is one feature that I like in Emacs and Vim that probably there's some extension to do this in Visual Studio Code, but it's not ergonomic, so I don't do it often. And I used to do it a lot. And that is macros. especially when you're working with kind of wacky code. So there is no, like here I can rename the application variable by pressing F2, and it's going to be smart enough to find all the variable names that have this name and rename accordingly. It will not do a simple text search. It is aware of the binding structure of the program. That's kind of cool. But in some cases, you don't have that kind of binding structure to go by. So having macros is super handy. But other than that, I don't miss Emacs or Vim, I don't think. I still use them when I am on a remote machine. I use Vim, I don't use Emacs. Yep, let it crash, just like Erlang. Let it crash is a good philosophy. I just don't like how auto encrypt from Smalltalk is crashing my Kill the Newsletter server, the existing one. Whatever. Lucas is here. Hello. It's great to have you here. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed the session. All right, so I went on the wrong route there, but I recovered. So response locals, I don't think we talked about response locals before. So let me talk about that. You will notice that I have this generic here with the response locals logging, and that is going to set the generic here, this particular generic here. It's going to set the type of the response locals. By default, again, if you don't have this, anything goes in response locals. No complaints, and that's bad. So here I am declaring the type of thing that I can expect to find in the response locals. And if you don't know what the response locals is, it's a grab bag. As a user of Express, you have the response locals as a place to put stuff. You can put anything you want. I'm putting functions there. I will be putting values there. It's just a grab bag. You can put whatever you want. And if you are using the rendering engine in Express, then the response locals will be available as values in the view. But I'm not using that engine, so I don't really care about that functionality. It's just a good place to put stuff in middleware when I need that to be available later in the request handler. And if you don't know what middleware and request handler is, and you're interested in me explaining this, let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I would just assume that you have some understanding of how Express works. I do like Erlang though. I used to work in a company that used Erlang. Before Elixir. Before Elixir, they were using Erlang because they were in the telecom business. Turns out that I was there for the inception of Elixir. I just knew José Valim. We used to work in the same city. Well, he worked in Poland, but his company was in the same city, so we would go to some of the same meetings when he was at his company, when he wasn't working remotely. And I watched some of the first talks about Elixir. It was just an idea. Just like, I have this crazy thought that maybe we could have a different language with some other features like protocols and everything, pulling features from other languages and create this impressive little language that uses the Erlang VM. And I was like, interesting. And then it became this whole ecosystem. It's amazing. And José Valim is like the best. Really like the person. Tuples and recursive message passing. I love it. Yeah, it's functional programming that we were talking about the other day. But it's nothing like Faust. Anyhow. So because of these generics, I am more strict about the stuff that I put in the grab bag, which is good. It gives you a little bit of control and also gives you a little bit of tracing, because when we get to the request handler, for instance here, we'll be able to declare what response locals we expect. And we should only declare the response locals that have been set by middleware before us. And as long as we do that, we are able to command and click and go to the middleware that define that local. If you use middleware in Express, you may run into the issue of you are in the request handler and you have no idea where the response locals came from. Types will help you with that. Gotta love TypeScript. I mean, it's such a nice little thing. Or a nice big thing, I guess. Anyhow, this middleware is going to do the following. First, we are enabling this configuration in Express to trust the proxy because we are running the reverse proxy, which is Caddy. We are running that reverse proxy, so we can trust it. And we can trust that it will be passing the IP address of the client reliably. And we want to log that IP address. So that's why I have this directive here. You can read the Express documentation to understand better what trust proxy does. In a nutshell, it will say, believe in the IP address set by the reverse proxy, which in this case we control. You can still totally spoof an IP address when you're making requests, so don't take this as like the ultimate authority. There is no ultimate authority on where stuff comes from in the web. But at least it will be reliable enough for logging, which is what I'm interested in. So we set this property, and then we define a middleware. I said I wouldn't explain this in depth, but I cannot help myself. A middleware is just a little function that will run in between. A request will come into the server, middleware will be run, and then the request will be passed along to the next middleware, eventually a request handler that will answer the request. So that's the structure, that's the architecture when using something like Express. And this line, strictly speaking, is not really necessary in this case, though I will keep it. But I'm not going to explain why I have this here, because if you don't have this set yet, it will be set here. How come it can be undefined? Turns out that in course lore, we have something called a live update, which is a reentrant thing. You pass the same request into the application multiple times. That's a story for another day. But I will keep this line here just because it is the same line we have over there, which means here in course lore, which means that we will be able to extract this into a library at some point. Then I give the request a unique ID and I start storing the time and I set this local. So now this response locals log is a function that will be available to everything further down the line, every middleware and request handler. And what it does is simply extend the notion of logging for the application with some request-specific stuff, like the request ID that was set here, the time, how much time has passed, and information about the request, and then whatever else you want to log. And then here I'm doing something kind of funny looking, where I set this locals and then I immediately grab it in a variable, and then I do some logging. And the reason why I'm doing this is, again, related to that. It has to do with the reentrant stuff. I will not get into that. I just want to make sure that further down the line, if I overwrite my log, I want to get the old log. I want to get the original log when logging here. So that's why I grab this log before I pass the request further down the line. And I think I want a new line here, just for cosmetic reasons. So this time we are logging as the request starts. And notice that because we are using the response locals log, we don't have to put any extra data here. That will already be logged. We can just say that we are starting this request. And then we can set an event handler for when the request is over that will look at the content length and log that it has been finished. This is the status code we sent, and this is the content length, if any. And there are libraries to deal with this problem of logging something after the middleware is over, but it boils down to this. When the response is closed, the socket you use to communicate with the browser, that socket has been closed. And then you call this next function, which is an express thing that simply means this middleware is over. And not only that, this middleware decided that the request needs to proceed going down with other middleware and request handlers that may be further down. So that's what this next function is doing. It's passing the request along. And here is an example of a response or of a request handler. And that is all there is to logging something. So with that, let's commit what we have. And let's try this out. Let's see if we are logging the requests as they come in. Awesome. So we see here that we are logging that the main process has started. And this is the URL we expect to find the application. We are also logging the start of every child process. We will have 8 web processes because my machine has 8 cores. And we will have 1 email process. Right now doesn't do anything, but eventually it will be the email server. But right now the web process is working. And we have not only 1 web process, we have 8 of them. And the reverse proxy will be doing some load balancing for us. Caddy will be doing load balancing for us, which means that I should be able to just visit this URL, and I'm going to do that on the command line using curl. And I get back my response to do. But not only that, and this is the interesting bit, it is going to a random backend server because Caddy is proxying that for us. And here is the ID of that process, which is process 5, same ID. And this is the ID of the request, and this is the IP address that it came from. And this is the request itself, and some information about the status that came out, and the size of the request. Now, there is one thing that I am not seeing, and that's the timing thing. Why is it not here? That's weird, isn't it? Because this line just doesn't seem to be running. This is running because we see the ID and we see the IP address. But where is the time? That's very odd. Let's kill the application and put some stuff here to test. We are getting the after, but not the before. What? What the hell? Oh, we are getting the timing now. Oh, we are getting that before. It is here. Oh, so that's what was happening. It was logging right all along and I am silly. Here is the timing for that request. Or actually, here is the timing for that request. It's just 0 milliseconds and 8 milliseconds. So I guess that is the downside of using tabs. If your space is right at the edge, then the tabs will not work quite right. It's interesting that this is happening. I guess it is happening now and not on Coursera, because here web is probably taking fewer characters and email is taking fewer characters, so the whole tabbing situation is different. I wonder if I should instead be putting 2 tabs or just space tab. Space tab should take care of it, shouldn't it? I think it should. Let's try it. Yeah, now that's more like it. So let's go to kill the... Oh, I guess that's the problem of not having extracted a library yet. I will have to come back to Coursera and apply the same fix. That's good, right? Taking a tangent here on a higher point. I think it is a good thing to repeat yourself a little bit before you find the right abstractions, because having the wrong abstraction is worse than having no abstraction. And also, it is good to write the same thing twice in different ways and make sure that they are saying the same thing. For instance, how you have to declare the type and then use it. You're sort of stating the same information twice. You're stating the information here and you're sort of stating the same information here. For one thing, this is exactly copy and pasted. But I don't think that this is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. When you write the same thing twice, and in this case, the type checker is making sure that the 2 definitions are somehow linked. In other words, this value better obey this type. When you have to write the same thing twice and these things are checked and they're linked, you tend to find mistakes. Like what happened here. I read and reread and rewrote and improved on this little snippet. It's just 85 lines of code, but I spent a lot of time to make sure that everything about this was exactly right. And as I copy and paste it and write it again and explain it to you, I find little issues like this. And the same goes for, like, you write a piece of software and then you document that piece of software. You wrote the same thing twice. You wrote an implementation and you wrote the documentation that goes with it. And hopefully the 2 will be linked in a way that is probably not verifiable by a machine, but still they are referring to the same thing. And when you write the same thing twice, you find mistakes. Anyhow, logging, done. That's in the bag. And that's all there is to logging, actually. And again, there are libraries to do this, but they don't quite work in exactly the way I thought they should. So with 85 lines of code, we end up with logging that works exactly like what I think it should look like. Perfect. Do we have time to do database? Perhaps. Let's try. So before any request handler, I will want to do database stuff, which again, I am going to copy from Coursera. So here's an example of a local that will be at the application level, not at the response level. So let's find the type for this. And this time I will have to write that whole incantation that we saw before, which I probably should have kept, but I didn't. This whole thing from a couple minutes ago. Do you remember that? And then this database type, this is part of a library that we need to import. Which is my library. And I'm going to put that import. I want to say here. There you go, the type is there. That means that we are able to do things like application, web, locals, database, but we are not able to do banana because that has not been declared in this type. See, I'm writing the same thing twice and they are linked, and then I'm catching mistakes. Awesome. So this whole database setup is something that I want to do with code that sort of looks like this. I will start by copying and pasting and then removing a bunch of things. So what you're looking at, I will first paste and then explain. Okay, here we are. Oh, no. It does not work like that. The database is something that pertains to the whole application. Oh, man, I will have to backtrack here. Again, this is just that. And starting to think that I should declare this type explicitly. I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to declare this type. Most of these applies. Let's see. Name, version, process, and the types of processes that I have are main and web and email. That still applies. The configuration looks about right. But I have that declaration here already. Perfect. Then the static thing. Then the ports are just have web ports. These I don't have in this case. And here I have web and I don't have, I guess I will have email. But not yet. And I will have database, which will have a type of database. And what is this doing here? See, as I am typing the type, I realized that this doesn't look right. Somehow that was missing from the type. Oh, that's a value declaration, not a type declaration. Okay. Okay, no more complaints. Awesome. I think I nailed this one right now. Yeah, okay. Looking good. Let's go over what happened here. Oh, I guess there is one complaint. I'll have to say a good as any here to make this happy. Yeah, okay. So I explicitly declared the type of application of the application variable. And because I am writing the same thing twice, I'm finding mistakes. But this is the structure of an application, of a Q newsletter application data structure. And it will have the log function and it will have the database function. And then no more complaints. Great. So we can finally get back to the database stuff. I will have to create a directory for the database file to live in. I'm using SQLite as the database engine, so the database will be a file, just one file in the file system. Then I will create a database using the application name.db. That sounds about right. Was that the case before? And the application is still crashing. Oh well. It's gonna crash for a million reasons at this point. Let's go to production real quick and see if the database name is the same. Yes, it is the application name.db. That has not changed since ever, it seems. Okay, so I start the database, and when the application is about to end, I close the database. And here, I will have to check that the process is equal to main. If the process is the main process, then I have to run the database migration, which starts here and ends way below there. So if I am in the main process, remember that the main process runs first and it is a singleton. It is a process that there exists only one of. There could be multiple web processes, one per core. There could even be multiple email processes, though I haven't really thought of a good way of doing that. I guess there would need to be some sort of reverse proxy at the XMTP level, and I'm going to try and avoid that. So I think that there will only be one email process. But anyhow, the main process runs first and needs to do the whole database migration before it can spawn the children processes. So if you are in the main process, then you start migrating the database. You set the journal mode to write a head log, which makes SQLite tangential or significantly faster actually. Then you will run the migration, and the migration looks the same as this. So we'll be able to just borrow from here. And this code stays exactly the same. And this is something that we don't have to deal with in Kill the Newsletter. And then it finished migrating the database. I see that some fields have default values, and I think that we will change that in the future, but perhaps we can leave that for another day. So here are some things that I have to check in the future when I get back to the database. The first is stop using default values. I'll probably explain why I moved away from doing things this way when we get there. And second, double check that the old migration system is compatible with this using SQLite's user data. Again, something that I will explain in depth when we get there. But I think that for the time being, this is a working thing. We have some logging, we have some database. If I run the application, it runs. It already ran, actually. And it will even have a data folder with a database file in there. And I will open that database file in dbeaver, and we'll see if the structure is right. Mainly for the purpose of showing dbeaver, which I kind of like and I want you to know about. So open an SQLite database. The path will be this. And in terms of driver properties, there is one driver property that I like, and that is the foreign keys. I want that to be true or on. And then there are other things like journal mode, it's write a head log, but that doesn't really matter because if you set a database file, a SQLite file to write a head log, it's a property that lives in the database file. It's not just a property of the connection to the file. Connected, awesome. So here is the Kill the Newsletter file in dbeaver and the entries and the feeds. And this is the structure of the entries, for instance. And here is an entity relationship diagram, which of course is a bit silly for such a simple schema, but still nice to have. Awesome. Yeah, I think I will leave it at that. Oh, yeah, that object has changed. Do you want to persist that change the database? Nope. Didn't know that that was going to cause a file to change. Oh well. Let's commit what we have and then we'll wrap up. So, let me talk about the schedule moving forward, and then we will say our goodbyes. Tomorrow, I'm feeling like taking the day off, so I will not be streaming tomorrow. Then on Monday, we'll be back to JS Effects. And next week, we have two events that are noteworthy. The first is on Wednesday, we'll have a meeting of the study group, the C++ Digital Signal Processing JUICE study group. We'll be meeting on Wednesday. And the super special event is on Friday. I have just confirmed this afternoon that I will have a guest on Friday. Same time as usual, very special guest. Sarin, who is the director of the Triforce Percent Speedrun, will be joining us to talk about composition of music for games, specifically for the Nintendo 64. music that was injected in Ocarina of Time via an exploit, via an arbitrary code execution exploration. Super interesting stuff. So we'll be talking about Reaper and about how to compose for music, for games and whatnot. And we'll also be talking about how he created all the Triforce% assets, how he created the actors, the spaces, the cell shading at the end. We'll be looking at the code. It will be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to that. If you didn't watch already the Triforce% run, make sure to catch that. The Triforce% speedrun is amazing. It's mind-blowing. It is by far the best speedrun I have ever seen. And it's like one of the most amazing pieces of art I have ever seen. So Saurian will be Saurian, I'm not the best at pronouncing his name. Saurian will be a guest next Friday. So not tomorrow, the Friday after that, we'll have him over. So make sure to watch the Triforce% speedrun if you have not already, and watch some of the other videos in which he explains which parts are in the original cartridge and whatnot, because we will not be covering that. We'll be covering the code and the nitty gritty, and we'll be talking about the music composition aspects as well in Reaper. All right, so thank you to Mage, Bo, and Lucas for joining me here on the chat. Thank you to everyone else who is watching this. Have a great weekend. I see you back here on Monday. And yeah, have a good one. Take care. Thank you for watching the stream. You know how great it has been. Or maybe it sucked, and I am glad that you stuck with me. And soon we'll all be back together for some more coding or talking or chilling. The next time I'll be streaming.